I'd like to welcome you to the MIT Enterprise Forum Global Broadcast Program on extreme science and its entrepreneurial opportunities, specifically involving nanotechnology. MIT is a global organization with over 25 chapters worldwide, and collectively across those chapters they create over 300 events annually. Their mission of the MIT Enterprise Forum is to connect technology entrepreneurs, to stimulate entrepreneurship and networking, and to foster economic growth in our localities. In addition to these local events, the MIT Enterprise Forum does a number of these global broadcasts, which are viewed by dozens of sites worldwide and are also available online for streaming. Most of those programs come from MIT's base in Cambridge, but this program is originating from Seattle and is produced by the Northwest chapter of the MIT Enterprise Forum, which is actually the second largest and one of the oldest chapters of the MIT Forum worldwide. And we're very proud to be producing our first global broadcast program. We're here in Seattle on the occasion of another first, the first hosting by the United States of America of the International Standards Organization, ISO, Technical Committee 229, which covers nanotechnology, which is meeting all week right across the street from us here. And we're pleased that some ISO delegates have joined us tonight as part of the other program that was here, the 2009 Nanotechnology Health and Safety Forum, whose lead sponsor of that forum is the Battelle Corporation. I'd like to recognize the team here in Seattle that helped put together this program, starting with Ava Dugoj in the back from PricewaterhouseCoopers Seattle office, and Steve Suter, if you're here, an independent consultant. They are both chairs of the Global Broadcast Group at our local Northwest chapter of the MIT Forum. Also Mike Donahue, who is a patent counsel at Davis Wright Tremaine and was also a national judge for Small Times Magazine's annual Small Tech Award several years ago. Dr. Mohan Venkataramana, who is founder of Syntonics and is also an alumnus, and we have to recognize alumnus because we are supported by the Alumni Association, came out of Course 10, Chemical Engineering at MIT, and Dr. Andre Gollard of Thinking Errors Neuroscience. And if you think that's an interesting name, go check his website, which is Thinking Errors, except the zero is an O because it's an error.com. It's a very good website. And my name is John Martin. I am an alum of Course 15 at MIT, the Sloan Management School. I'm a member of the board here of the Northwest chapter of MIT Enterprise Forum. And my main hook into this topic was having led an economic development initiative for the state of Washington around nanotechnology for several years in the mid-decade, and getting generally known around town as a sort of compulsive advocate on demand for nanotechnology. And as such, I've developed a working theorem that after a generation of entrepreneurial focus on IT and retail, web, wireless, so many business plans in the last years about being the next Microsoft or the next Starbucks, and many of those are the sorts of things that can be developed and tested literally over your kitchen table. I think that more of the future entrepreneurial opportunities are going to be like what you've heard about today at this forum and just a few minutes ago from Leroy Hood, renewed focus on extreme science, extremely exotic or exotically extreme science that involves multiple PhDs, not only multiple persons with PhDs, but as we were talking about, persons who themselves have multiple PhDs across a wide variety of disciplines. Exotic instrumentation, complex intellectual property, lengthy trials of toxicity or endurance or clinical trials, and revisions that take years and not weeks. And my premise is that this is a very different entrepreneurial climate than most venturists are used to. And in short form, extreme science is not something that you're going to find on the iPhone App Store. But the iPhone is a result of extreme science, and the next generations of the iPhone are going to be a result of further extreme science and nanotechnology. And a particularly challenging version of extreme science is our topic tonight, nanotechnology, which is fundamentally molecular engineering of materials. And I like to sometimes call it genomics for everything else. And earlier tonight at this evening program, we heard Dr. Leroy Hood from the Institute of Systems Biology talk about the role of genomics and the ability to manipulate individual molecules and read individual molecules of proteins for physiology. Nanotechnology basically does that for all sorts of other materials. Like genomics, Instead of mitigating or buffering issues of performance that you have, you can manipulate potentially molecules Lego block by Lego block to fundamentally alter qualities and fundamentally embed desired functionality inside raw materials versus some sort of mechanical fabrication or electrical transformation, allowing for the potential of superior performance, cost effectiveness, and I think in the case of each of the companies here tonight, new levels of super performance that was never possible before in any format. Now, this kind of advanced science seems like the realm of multinationals, and a lot of multinationals are deeply involved. But as with biotechnology, where in addition to big pharma, there have always been these struggling bootstrap firms that nonetheless go through the clinical trials and try to develop something, in nano from the very beginning, there's been a strong component of entrepreneurship. It's been over 4 years since our forum did a global broadcast on nano, and interestingly, it's been exactly 10 years since the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy issued its white paper report that became in the year 2000 the American National Nanotechnology Initiative that then led to everyone else's National Nanotechnology Initiative and eventually the formation of ISO 229, which is meeting here in Seattle this week. So what we're going to do tonight is look at 3 companies working in different areas of nanotechnology and talk about how their experience of bootstrap entrepreneurship has been and how it's different from the more traditional kinds of entrepreneurship that we often hear about. And we have with us tonight, starting on my immediate right, Christina Lemosny, who is CEO and founder of Modumetal, which is involved with, and I'm saying this for each of you roughly, advanced nano-engineered metallurgy, primarily with larger scale structural members for transport vehicles. Next to her is Chris Wheaton, who is Chief Operating Officer and Financial Officer for Energy 2, which is involved with applying nano-engineered materials to electricity storage management in the sort of clean tech alternative energy vertical space. And finally, but not least, Bart Norton, who is Director of Sales at Assemblon, which is involved with several applications of one of the rather famous and technically sexier nanotechnologies, which is material synthesis through molecular self-assembly, if I'm saying that correctly, which fundamentally, rather than smashing together or tearing apart and mixing, it actually works like what we were talking about earlier, biology and physiology, using chemical catalysts and chemical triggers to get individual chemical components to grow together and naturally link up into the desired compounds. So I'd like to start working back, starting with you, Bart. If you could give the actual and correct technical description of what Assemblon does, its particular management, and the commerce ideas derived from that nanotechnology.
Very well. Good evening.
And I'm going to have you pull that a little bit closer. It's not a long-range mic, unfortunately.
Okay. Is that good? All right. Assemblon is about a 30-person company. We're in Redmond, Washington, which is just about 20 miles east of Seattle. And we started off as a company making self-assembled molecules. And essentially what these are sulfur-based compounds that self-assemble onto gold. They create very thin layers, a very tight crystalline structure, and the other end of the molecule away from the sulfur is a so-called head group. And those head groups can be changed, and they essentially provide the properties of the surface. You can make them hydrophilic and hydrophobic, and you can capture proteins, you can reject proteins. There are a whole variety of uses. And the ultimate use for this sort of nanotechnology Lego building block is to create computing elements. And that's still many years in the future, but some of that work is moving out of the basic research phase and into actual work in development. How does a company that started off making a catalog product in molecular self-assembly get into extending the life of beer, sake, wine, and biodiesel fuel, and in addition, having the opportunity to revolutionize the worldwide energy market by providing a cheap, effective, low-cost infrastructure solution for hydrogen storage? And I'll go into those very briefly. Our scientists one night were in the lab and they had just come back from drinking beer, and they noticed that a smell from one of the chemicals in the laboratory was very similar to the smell that they got from the beer, which they didn't particularly like. And that led to about 6 months of work in trying to identify what it is that was causing the odor and how they could treat it. And we've now come up with a method which is patent pending that allows molecules in the treatment of beer in the process of brewing to essentially take out these chemicals that reduce the shelf life of the beer. And as you may know, there are trillions of liters of beer made per year. It's a huge market, dominated by a couple of large breweries. 90% of all of the beer in the world is produced by 3% of the companies. So obviously that's our focus, but the people for which it has the most economic benefit are the boutique breweries where they have a severe problem with shelf life and often have to suffer the economic consequences of their dealers being unable to sell the product. As to the hydrogen, we noticed that when the thiol molecules came down and touched the catalytic gold surface, that hydrogen was released. And this is just one of those serendipitous discoveries. And we then started to engineer molecules where hydrogen would be released sequentially by touching down multiple times on a catalytic surface. That hydrogen could then be collected, and the residual molecule that was formed could be condensed and could be pumped out and recycled. And that's the basis for our hydrogen economy approach. We have a system that will allow hydrogen to be delivered to a fueling station for costs that are equivalent to what gasoline costs today, which is highly unusual. Now it's 2.5 to 6 times the cost for either cryogenic or compressed hydrogen. And we've solved the problem with infrastructure. How do you store hydrogen? How do you transport it? Our molecule allows it to be stored and transported at normal temperatures and pressures. We can use pipelines. We can use tanker trucks. We can use ocean tankers. We have been able to reduce the cost of hydrogen infrastructure to 1/10 of what was predicted by the Department of Engineering as recently as 10 years ago. So that's fundamentally the story about the two technologies. The hydrogen opportunity is so huge that it was difficult for us to get venture funding. People doubted the size of the opportunity. People were uncertain as to how a small company could ever even begin to attack an opportunity of that huge size. Luckily, we found some visionary people. They were not in the United States. They were in Japan. They were in the Middle East. They were in London and in Singapore. And these people understand the fundamentals of the energy business, which is in 50 years, the petroleum economy is largely going to be gone. And what is going to substitute for that? Well, we raise our hand. We say we can do hydrogen for the same cost as petroleum, and we can use the existing infrastructure. So finding those venture people, in our case, one of them was a hedge fund, has been a difficult problem. It's taken us several years to identify these sources of alternative capital that is patient and that really does understand what can be done and has the wherewithal to introduce us at the very highest levels to the size corporations that can make the molecule, that can distribute the molecule, that can provide the use for hydrogen. All of the major automobile companies in the world have an internal combustion hydrogen engine. And surprisingly enough, those hydrogen engines have equivalent energy efficiency to fuel cells. And they cost about 5% of what a fuel cell costs for the equivalent amount of power. So the Fords and the Mazdas and the Chryslers and the BMWs, the Volkswagens, the Audis, they all have hydrogen engines, and they're just looking for somebody to step up and say, we've solved the chicken and egg problem. We can now deliver hydrogen to a fueling station.
So let me continue with you just for a minute. In the meantime, while you've been having that money-raising challenge, and also even talk a little bit about the beverage,
Yes.
How do you keep the lights on in the meantime as a small bootstrapped firm?
We have a catalog business. We sell through the World Wide Web. It's not as large a business as we had hoped it to be, but it does provide some money to keep the lights on. And we ship all over the world from our headquarters over in Redmond using FedEx.
And also, you are thinking of potentially spinning these off as separate businesses. Can you talk a little bit about that model that you see for the company?
That is certainly a potential. We view ourselves as a licensing operation. We believe that we have to build first articles We basically have to prove the system. We have to be able to show people that what we say does indeed work. But we have no interest in being a huge corporation. There's no way that any corporation could roll this opportunity out at the rate that it could be rolled out. So we're looking for people that are multi-billion-dollar corporations already, to which they want to layer this type of technology.
Okay, and we'll come back to that. I'd like to move, if I can jump over you and move to Christina, to similarly give me the correct description of what Modumetal does, and similarly what your commercial vision is for Modumetal.
Absolutely. So as you mentioned earlier, Modumetal makes nano-laminated alloys, which essentially means we're making next-generation plywood without the wood. So we make structures that are laminar, just like plywood, out of metal and ceramics and polymers. We mix them all together. And ultimately what we're trying to do is defy the laws of physics as they exist today. So we are trying to produce metals, we have produced metals, that can outperform materials in a number of different properties that used to be traded. The greatest example that I can give you is in one of our applications, which is an armor application, where we've been able to produce a material that's both hard, extremely hard, and at the same time very tough. And if you've ever been involved in materials engineering, you know that those are two material properties that usually don't coexist. We are doing the same thing in a number of other applications, including thermal barrier coatings and corrosion-resistant coatings and very, very lightweight structures for automotive applications. And fundamentally, we're changing the way that metals are manufactured. So in order to really explain what Modumetal does, I have to go back in history just maybe a little bit, if you can bear with me. So if you went back, let's say, to the beginning of the steel industry, so the Bronze Age, and looked at how materials were manufactured, there were basically two fundamental properties that we had at our disposal for materials design. They were the chemistry of the material and the microstructure of the material. So you could, for example, mix a little bit of zinc with a little bit of, I don't know, copper, and maybe come up with one particular alloy, or you could mix a little bit of iron and some nickel and some chromium and maybe get another kind of alloy. And essentially what you put in the soup determined what kind of properties you got. And then somebody figured out, well, you know, if I heat it up really fast and then cool it down really fast, I get a different structure and it behaves a little bit different. And that was discovered a few thousand years ago, and really over the span of the ensuing few thousand years, nothing changed. We played with the same variables, we played with the chemistry, we played with the microstructure, and we tried to come up with new, inventive ways of making materials. Modumetal has completely changed that. So we've added a new dial, if you will. We have figured out a way to laminate materials, very much like nature does. So if you were to take a cross-section of your bone, for example, or look at a tree, you would see that it's actually a laminated structure. And that we're able to achieve, and nature's able to achieve some of these dramatic material properties, like a really, really hard structure that's also at the same time very lightweight by taking these approaches. And that's essentially what we're doing, but we're doing it using processes and methods that can be scaled up to very large-scale manufacturing.
Okay, and now Chris, if you could correctly explain better than I did your magic, and also how you're playing in this very hot space right now of clean tech and alternative energy.
Sure. You actually did a pretty good job, John, so no big correction needed. And I'm actually a business guy, so I'm not allowed to use terms like hydrophilic and molecular self-assembly. So I'll keep it pretty high level. We are an advanced materials company that is manufacturing materials for energy storage applications. So we are actually building materials that become ingredients in energy storage devices like ultracapacitors and batteries. So we're a hard science and extreme science company, as John described earlier, and we are trying to tap into the huge demand that's out there for alternative energy storage. Energy storage is one of the great missing things right now for the transformation that we're trying to undertake to a new form of an energy economy, and we think there's an enormous opportunity, an enormous opportunity that's created by nanotechnology or materials. We think that's the science that's going to change the next decade or two. In the 90s, it was IT and telecommunications. And that was created that huge economic growth, but we think and we've bet on the fact that material science is where the next big economic engine is going to come from, and we think it's going to happen to a large extent in energy. So what do we do specifically? We make black powder. It's literally pure carbon powder, and that powder becomes an ingredient in those devices that I mentioned, batteries and ultracapacitors. The interesting thing is that not all carbon is created equal, and most carbon today for these purposes comes from naturally occurring precursors like, believe it or not, coconut husks. So coconut husks are the best performing source today, source of natural carbon for ultracapacitors. Not really something you would have expected, and I'm sure that coconuts weren't naturally selected through evolution to become great carbon sources for ultracapacitors. So they have limitations. They have a lot of iron in them. So the fact that iron goes into an electricity storage device is intuitively probably not a good thing. You're also limited by where the coconut comes from. Is it Indonesian or Malaysian or Fijian? What year did it grow? And how was the weather that year? All of those things matter into what goes into this naturally occurring precursor for an energy storage device. We've decided to flip that on its head, and so rather than take something that exists today, and this is actually similar to what's been discussed already, rather than take something that exists today and modify it for purposes of energy storage, we've taken chemicals and other precursors, catalysts, and combined them to build the right structure from the beginning. So we gave up on what Mother Nature provided, and we decided to build our own thing. And what we found is that we can optimize and tune, and this is a probably consistent theme that's coming out, we can optimize and tune what goes in so that we can perfect what comes out. And the black powder that we produce from these chemical and catalytic inputs actually becomes near perfect for energy storage applications, primarily in the form of ultracapacitors. Although that same input also has applications in hydrogen storage. So little did I know I was sitting next to a potential competitor. Long way out for us. And frankly, I hope you win before we ever get there. It also has applications in industrial gas storage, like natural gas and methane. So there's automotive applications as we move to compressed natural gas and other natural gas combustion engines. There's an application as well for our technology. But today we're focused on this ingredient technology for ultracapacitors and batteries. A quick word about ultracapacitors. They're like batteries. They store energy. The difference is that they can release that energy and recharge the energy in seconds rather than hours. The downside is they don't store as much as batteries. It's a smaller bucket, but you can get every last drop of energy out of that bucket in really a matter of seconds and then put it all back in as fast as you want. So lots of applications in regenerative braking, for example, in hybrid vehicles. So you can recapture that energy from a braking event much more efficiently than you can with a lithium-ion battery. So an application of ultracapacitors, just to kind of make it concrete, is pairing ultracapacitors with lithium-ion batteries, putting them to hybrids, and overall creating a smaller, better, faster, cheaper, more efficient energy storage system for an electric-driven vehicle.
So given all that complexity, what is your short-term revenue plan?
Sell black powder to those who make ultracapacitors. Short-term and long-term plan. It's pretty straightforward. We are an ingredient company, and we will sell materials to those who manufacture the devices. In the case of ultracapacitors, the majority of the value, and by that I mean performance and cost, comes from the carbon input that goes into that device. So we believe we have an advantage there. We know we have an advantage there, and so we will sell to those who make the devices. It's not in our best interest to try to figure out how to become a device manufacturer, although that's been talked about quite a bit. We are an ingredient company.
Okay, and Christina, one of the questions I had for you, and we talked about this, is whether you would be, similar to these others, whether you'd be actually making metal components, making the raw metal, selling the process, just licensing the recipe. Of all those various ones, what are you looking at or focusing on?
All of the above. So, so actually, the process that we use for manufacturing modumetal is one that leverages an existing infrastructure. So we use electrochemistry, and one of the objectives that we have is to take an aging infrastructure, namely the electroplating infrastructure, and work within that infrastructure to realize some of the materials that we're talking about manufacturing. We are doing that now. As a matter of fact, we're just about to launch our very first partnership with a company in Europe that's going to start manufacturing modumetal. We also manufacture on site. We anticipate licensing in some cases with other companies that have capabilities or are interested in building up capabilities to manufacture. In our case, it really depends on the market. So, for example, our approach to nickel superalloy manufacturing is going to be completely different than our approach to next generation nanolaminated zinc coating manufacturing. And so we can either leverage the infrastructure or build new infrastructure depending on the business case.
So across all three of you, one of the things that strikes me as interesting when you're fundamentally ingredient companies is that what you're looking forward to is almost being sort of an intellectual property holding company rather than sort of the next Intel or the next Asarco or the next Exide or whatever. Could any of you or all of you comment on that business model of being more of an IP holding company or a licensing company rather than ramping to a large, which ultimately also could, be no more than 30 or 40 person staff rather than a big company? How does that play out as a business model and as a venture play? Any thoughts or comments?
I think it fits very well into a venture capital based funding model because those companies tend to have exits sooner than those who are trying to become whose stated goal is we want to be the next Google, we want to be the $1 billion IPO. If that's the logical exit, I think that is a tougher sell to venture capitalists than if you can say, look, we're going to hit 100 million in revenue and then we're going to sell, and we're going to sell to a big company that has 5 billion in revenues. And they will want to acquire both our technology and our expertise and our customers, and you will get an exit, Mr. or Ms. Venture Capitalist. I actually think it maps pretty well.
Now, Bart, in your case, I think one of the possible perspectives is to be this sort of holding company, and there would be multiple assemblons. There would be hydrogen assemblon and beverage assemblon and so forth. Right. How does that play out for overall assemblon as a business plan and investment?
Well, as I stated earlier, the issue for us is that to really capture particularly the hydrogen opportunity, there's no way you could physically build an organization fast enough. And so therefore, it's really the only strategy that allows us to be rolled out fast enough to build the momentum that creates an international business. For the wine, beer, sake, life-extending goo, that's something that we could control ourselves. And one of the things that we are looking at is to produce that powder in about a $5 million plant. We believe that we could get about $40 million a year in revenue from that. There'd be relatively few costs pushed against that. So that's a possibility of having a freestanding organization that would either be available for acquisition or would generate a lot of revenue to fund future development.
And Christina, do you see multiple Modumetals subsidiaries under Modumetal LLC?
Well, never say never, but it's not our strategy right now.
Okay.
I think we tend to look at the market structure and try not to change that if we can avoid it. So, probably the best example I can give is we work with a big aerospace company and we're developing materials for them that ultimately will be specified as part of their product offering. Our expectation is that we will work within their existing supply base to bring the supply base up to speed on manufacturing modumetals so that we're not taking on the daunting task of trying to supply to a manufacturer that's that large. So that's one scenario. There are a multitude of other scenarios, just like Bart mentioned, where we might actually manufacture the material on our own. So,
go ahead, Chris.
Quick comment on not going to be like Intel. I would actually say Intel is an ingredient company as well. And in fact, we often compare ourselves to, when we're trying to think about how do we market ourselves, how do we describe ourselves, we think about Intel. And what Intel's done a great job at is arming the masses. So they're the arms dealer, and they're making everyone better and able to compete with each other better. And in fact, it's created the situation where if you don't use Intel or something similar, you're at a disadvantage to the rest of your competitors. And we're actually trying to structure ourselves in the same way, where you want to buy our ingredient, because if you don't, your competitors will eat your lunch. And that's really we're not licensing. We're not forming a holding company of technology to license each one. We're creating products that we intend to sell like an arms dealer and build revenues ourselves
So is that,
from selling
I wanted
those
to extend, when you
ingredients.
said you're structuring yourself to be like that, is that, or is there any more to that? How are you structuring yourself?
It's less of a, structure might not be the best word, more marketing and presenting ourselves to our customers, and ultimately setting our price where that outcome can be achieved, where we're actually enabling a variety of companies to compete with each other better, and we become the gold standard upon which you don't want to go to market without Energy 2's products.
Okay, and that reminds me of another comment you made, and this may or may not be a strong segue, but I remember you talked about at this early stage that you, like most small companies, would opportunistically sell to pretty much any customer that said yes, but with the proviso that I think you said that they were a real customer, a real commercial customer. And I was wondering if you could expand a bit what you mean and how you evaluate and qualify what is a real commercial customer, or how you define what isn't a real commercial customer.
So I would, I'm trying to think back when I said that. I would view today, kind of thinking about today's situation, a real customer is a customer that is manufacturing devices today that can use our ingredient. Not someone who wants to license it, not someone who wants to play with it, not someone who wants to go see what they can do and form a joint venture with us to go explore. We're a startup with venture capital backers who want to return, and we will sell to customers who engage in the standard discourse of business. Will pay for our product and help us make money.
And Bart, that reminded me, when we talked, you mentioned something about the fact that you didn't really sell the love of surface chemistry, but you made a very basic business proposition, and something about business people were poor conceptualizers, maybe about science. And if you could expand a little bit upon what you meant there about qualifying your customers.
Well, I think that's just a general comment. I've been in new product development for over 40 years, and I have found that you can describe something to people in words, you can write it on paper, but what we've increasingly done in the product opportunities I've been involved in the past is I build virtual 3D models of the products that work the way the customer said he wanted the product to work. I show it to the customer, and often it's not. They say, no, that's not what I said. So I haven't spent a lot of money developing the product. That's what I mean about conceptualization. We finally get a 3D animation that the customer said that works exactly the way I want it, and then we'll actually build the physical product. In the hydrogen area, it's more being able to demonstrate this first article. This does what we say it does. Here is a black box. You put the fluid in one end, you get pure hydrogen out the other end. I think people need to actually see that physical element before you're going to get people to make the sort of commitments that we're talking about for money and backing.
Okay. Another area I wanted to pursue a little bit, and this I'm going to start with you, Chris, is the theme I talked about up front about what I think is a transition in the economy from more of the dot-com wireless IT type of businesses towards exotic science. And you actually personally embody that, because Chris, before he was in Black Powder, ran and successfully sold several web companies, IT companies with your partner, and now, I guess, under the heading of now for something completely different, decided to go into carbon chemistry. And we had discussed earlier that, of course, a lot of elements of business are the same, hiring and management and so forth. But if you could comment a little bit about what is different about working in exotic science versus working in the IT realm.
Sure. So I am an IT refugee and successfully escaped from the dot-com and internet world, and about the same time moved up here from the Bay Area, and at that point knew that the next thing I wanted to do, I wanted it to be something that I could get passionate about, not something where if we did great, software runs a little bit faster, or the wireless calls are connected slightly more frequently. It just didn't, that just stopped being interesting to me, and I needed to find something that was both interesting from a business standpoint and maybe did some good in the world, so that we were successful. Not only were we successful from the typical startup perspective, but we also did good in the world along the way, hopefully. So that was the motivation, and my co-founder and I went hunting through the halls of the University of Washington, literally, walking the halls, looking for PhD students, professors, department chairs that would, one, talk to us, and two, that had some sort of idea or some research to pursue, or something that might be useful to us from a business perspective. So what we focused on was those technologies that had commercial viability. The interesting thing along the way was commercial viability is very different in hard science and extreme science than it is in IT and software. The phrase I've used and that I've used with John was, in IT, you can solve any problem you want with enough time and money. You can throw as many engineers as you want and spend as much time as you want, as much money as you want, and you will solve the problem in IT. Possible exception being chips and chipsets. But in the software world, literally, there isn't really a problem you can't solve with more engineers on the software side of things. Not so in hard science. There is a physical limitation. The laws of physics do apply, and it's possible that the thing you want to do just doesn't work, and that it will take 6 times as long as you thought, and that you can fail because the science just flat out doesn't come together. And that's a very different mindset, approach, structure, very different entrepreneurship sense that goes into building a hard science company, in my opinion, because there's always this specter of utter failure because you just can't do it hanging over your head. And there isn't a magic bullet for that. It's just the way it is. The magic is in setting up an organization that can adopt to failure, that can take advantage of serendipity, as was described earlier, and that can predict with some degree of accuracy how long something will probably take, although you never can depend on it. And those things are very different from managing a group of software engineers. And that's the challenge. That's been the challenge for me, making the migration from IT and software into extreme science or hard science or nanotechnology or whatever you want to call it.
Oh,
Can I ask
please.
a question,
Sure.
actually? Because that's a really interesting insight, and I have a question for you as well. On that point, how do you feel about scale-up in that context?
In my opinion, scale-up is everything. It's the hard problem to solve. In IT, it felt like the hard problem to solve was how do you translate customer requirements into engineering requirements, and how do you figure out what your customers want and then go build it. Where in material science and nanotechnology, it seems like the thing we're always worrying about, how do we scale this thing off the benchtop into large-scale reactors? How do we actually turn this into something that does not cost $6,000 a kilogram and can get down to $6 a kilogram? That is the thing to solve, and is the place where we will fail if we fail. So far, so good. No signs of failure, but that will be that'll be the challenge.
Bart, do you have any thoughts? You've been in science longer, but as I recall, more with larger corporations, and now you've moved down to the bootstrap level. What sort of differences have you seen?
Well, one of the reasons I'm involved in small corporations is the very close communication and the nimbleness of the organization, the willingness to let everybody participate at all different levels. I mean, we have PhDs and we have people like myself who has a business and engineering background. And, no suggestion, it's a brainstorming sort of an environment where no suggestion is rejected. You get everything out, and eventually you'll synthesize from all of those ideas some approach that can be very novel and unique, and that's not typical of large corporations. So I find it more comfortable to be in that environment.
Now, at the same time, one of the things, and this is getting to the PhD question, I know Christina has some thoughts on this, but we've all talked about the fact that at the same time that there is intrinsically in science maybe more of a collaborative approach, it's also the case that a lot of, I'll say, ivory tower science doesn't, or science culture doesn't blend very well with an entrepreneurial or a business culture. And one of the things that struck me is each of these companies very early on found some senior scientists that just were in some ineffable way in the right headspace to be in both science and in business. And I wondered if you could each comment a little bit on the kind of scientists it takes to be in entrepreneurship. And also, how do you find those besides serendipity?
All
Anyone?
right, so, well, I'm fundamentally opposed to the concept.
Okay, go ahead.
So I don't actually think there is a kind of scientist that we look for. First of all, I have a team of 15 people at Monumental. Started a company before this as well, and there's a team of 13 people there now. Every single one of the people that came in our front door was unique. And we either hired them for a collection of unique attributes that were, things like creativity and initiative, or we hired them because they had a very specific skill set that the company needed at that particular point in time. I think it's the challenge of an entrepreneurial team to figure out how to find a place for those unique individuals that come into the company to give them opportunities for growth and to be able to leverage these incredible minds that we need in order to make the technology work. So,
I actually agree, but I'll add a nuance to it. It's actually something that I've done since we talked early, John. But I think it's a timing thing, and I think that your founder, my co-founder, my PhD co-founder, it takes a unique kind of crazy person to want to go be the founder of a startup, and that is, when I think about two great scientists, I've got two in mind. There's one that would have naturally jumped in and did to go be a co-founder of a startup, and there's someone who absolutely never would have. No way, no how. And so I think that the first step for us in the founding of the company was to find the right person to match my co-founder and my complete lack of science background. The only class I ever failed was chemistry, and never recovered. So we had to have that scientist, and we had to find the right scientist, not someone who, we weren't looking at pedigree. We're looking at this person appears relatively smart. We like him. I could see being stuck in an airport in Pittsburgh with him, and it would be okay. He seems to have his head screwed on right. So let's give it a whirl. Now, we're 12 people later, and we've got some real electrochemistry challenges to solve. We just hired a rock star electrochemist out of Dow that is going to be phenomenal. And he would have never, ever jumped at the opportunity to earn no money for 3 years to go co-found a company. So he's right for us right now, and he's not an entrepreneur, but he will join a very small entrepreneurial-oriented company and be successful. I'm quite sure of it, but he probably wouldn't have been right at the time we founded the company. So I think I agree with Christina in that there's all sorts of people have all sorts of the right skills to bring. I think it's a matter of matching their disposition to the timing of the company.
One of the issues for us is an issue of staging. Obviously, if we want to play in this hydrogen space on a worldwide basis, we better have the territory well mapped out as quickly as possible so that we can capture the territory through intellectual property on a worldwide basis. And once we've captured the territory, then we can start to drill down to do the specific developments to bring these various things to the marketplace. We have a succession of 6 different molecules that we are using in the rollout of this hydrogen product. The first one was easy to make, it was easy to rehydrogenate, but it didn't carry much hydrogen on a per unit or per weight or per volume basis. Molecule number 6 is extraordinary. It will actually outperform liquid hydrogen. However, it's probably going to take us another 4 years to bring that to the marketplace. But we had to identify that, and we had to do enough experimental work to capture that part of the map from an intellectual property standpoint. Those are the people we had early on. As we begin to hire more people, they're going to be focused on the hard work of developing those ideas into actual products.
Okay, that leads me to another topic or a segue, which is about intellectual property. And there are a number of aspects to that. First of all, in general, and I'd like to ask Chris about this, one of the things that struck me is most IT companies, this isn't totally true, but most IT companies don't have a lot of, say, patents. They have either trade secrets or it's just they don't release the source code. But when you come into this business, it's all about intellectual property and sort of the care and feeding of patent attorneys. And just in your own head, how was that transition for you to get used to discussing the patent bar with people?
It's very accurate that IT just doesn't worry about it very much. It's not non-existent, but it just doesn't. It's not very common, and I think that is largely because there are a lot of once you know what's in a patent, you can figure out how to work around it. And in software in particular, that's pretty easy. So if you know what they're up to on a general basis, you can read the patent, which always publishes, find your way around it, achieve what the original inventor achieved without infringement. So people generally shy away from patents. On the materials side, for us, we weren't going to attract VC funding until we had a patent portfolio. There was just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We had to demonstrate that this intellectual property was both novel enough to warrant patent applications and protected. So we went down that path, and it was interesting. There was never a question. It was just one of those things that we went and we did. And we licensed the technology, licensed the University of Washington's half of the technology, and locked it up, created a patent portfolio, and we went and raised money not just based on the business model, but combined with the fact that that business model was based on protected intellectual property. So it wasn't magic to it. In fact, it was a pain in the rear to get the patents written and then negotiate with the University of Washington and get everything wrapped up. It was just a series of steps you had to go through to get it done. Non-negotiable series of steps.
Mm-hmm. Any?
Sure. So we actually took a slightly different approach in approaching the intellectual property question. Monumental was actually founded as part of another company, and we ended up spinning it out. And before we did, spent a lot of time looking at the space and at the competitive landscape and who was out there. And actually did kind of a very, very small version of intellectual ventures. So we identified the intellectual property in the space that we needed to own in order to lock up what was going on. And it turned out that thanks to the automotive industry, some of the key intellectual property that we were looking for was in the hands of bankrupt companies or companies that were in the process of going bankrupt. So we were able to acquire those and bring that portfolio together. We are constantly in patent writing mode and in protection mode because, as you mentioned, Chris, in material science companies in particular, patents do actually protect, and in fact, when you're talking about compositions of matter and in a space where there isn't a lot of patent density, there's an opportunity to protect yourself, and if you don't, somebody can cut open your material and look at it under a microscope and figure out what you're doing. So there really is no way to protect that as a trade secret. So we have been very aggressive working on that front.
Any comment? Or?
No.
That led me to a variation of that, which is, I would say, almost every economic development forum in every region of the U.S. I've ever been to at some point agonizes about this issue of technology transfer and licensing from the large research institutions, whether they be academic or federal, in their region. And one of the things that struck me interesting about each of your companies is, even in your case, I think they only had 49% rights, but otherwise, there was very little licensing from the university. You mostly developed it in-house with very smart people that you got from the university. And it made me wonder if we need to rethink the balance of attention between sort of spinning off science and spinning off scientists, and whether, in a sense, we worry too much about technology transfer issues.
So everyone, when they learn that we negotiated a license from the University of Washington, they say, oh, well, how was it? I've heard it's terrible. Oh, did you survive? Yes, we survived, and it actually wasn't that bad. So I want to dispel a rumor out there that the University of Washington doesn't know how to do technology transfer. That's not the case. There are institutions that do it better, and I think it's probably because they take more of the approach that John just described. So Stanford is notoriously good at spinning out technologies. There's quite a few billionaires who are in PhD programs at Stanford. I think Berkeley is also quite good, but they probably learned from Stanford. I think that it's an attitude of a longer-term perspective. And my impression is that those institutions that are good at it take the long-term perspective where if we don't worry about the last decimal point of patent cost reimbursement today, this idea has a better chance of producing a significant win down the road, and we'll see benefit. So let's take the long view on this, where other institutions take more of an approach of we spent $76,892.63 on patent prosecution on behalf of this application, and we expect to be reimbursed to the penny within 12 months, 30 days, and 9 hours of signing the contract. Okay, we'll write you the check, but that's not a partnership. That's not and I'm not talking about the University of Washington. That's not what they did to us, but I have heard stories about this. That if this institution can take the perspective of let's roll with it and help this company along and see what other resources we can bring to bear, we're actually going to be better off. And that shift of the attitude doesn't always occur.
Would it also be fair to say that there's maybe a strategy for small businesses to not necessarily look for the IP, but just look for the people, and then have them do the IP in-house?
I think you need to do both. We had a particular example where we had identified some IP at an Eastern university that was perfect for our application. We went to that university and started negotiations with them about licensing the technology, and the negotiation fell apart because the week that we were trying to conclude it, Google went public, and Stanford University, if I recall the number correctly, added $465 million to its endowment. And these people got stars in their eyes, and that was the end of the discussion.
So I will say it's almost impossible to predict when the inventive process is going to occur. So there are times when we license and there are times when we don't. But to the extent that we can control that process, we do try to. There's one thing that we realized early on about working with the university, and that is they're differently motivated than we are. And the idea of being able to make strategic decisions about what gets patented and what becomes trade secret doesn't exist when you're working with a university. And so, so we do, as you know, John, work a lot with professors from the University of Washington. And when we can, when it's appropriate, when the resources exist inside of the company for the work we're talking about doing, we try to do it inside of the company. And if it doesn't, then, we work with the university.
But also, I would also add that in terms of founding a company, though, you can't just go pluck a scientist from the university, because in all likelihood they've been funded by the university, their invention is owned by the university, and just because they're the inventor does not mean that you don't have to worry about technology transfer. In fact, you probably have to worry about it more because the university knows that person, what they worked on, and now they are watching. Now, they may not be good enough to actually keep track of it, but you have to assume that they are going to pay attention. And they get really touchy about that, rightly so.
All right, let me shift to talking, and this is almost towards the end, talk about money, which is a classic issue, and as we've all talked, a lot of that is common to all small businesses. But one of the things that's not common is each region has financial resources VCs, angels, and so forth, with particular focuses, whether it's computer sciences, life sciences, mechanical engineering. And if you're developing a more unusual or abstract exotic material, that's not going to fall into anybody's specialty. And I actually just ran into someone a couple of weeks ago that had this, wasn't any like yours, but this molecule, it was just this molecule that could do all these different things. And it was sort of a classic movie question, who are you going to call? And so my question is, to talk a little bit about the unique problems of finding financiers that get exotic technology, where you find them, and I'm actually going to start with you, Chris, because I think you just closed a round rather successfully, and if you could talk a little bit about whether that was easy or hard, local or not. I mean, it's always hard in 2009, but uniquely about your technology.
I had a full, robust head of hair before starting that process. It's an extremely hard question, and actually I think material science in particular is in a tough spot. There are, as you've noted, IT investors and biotech investors, and now there's clean tech investors. But there's not really, with a few exceptions, there's not really material science investors. And I think that actually started probably 5 years ago, maybe 5 to 7 years ago, when nano got a really bad rap. And there were quite a few nano dash X, you know, fill in the blank kind of startups, not one of which had any kind of victory that a venture capitalist could point to and say, hey, I want to go do one of those. And venture capitalists like to model success, which is a polite way of saying they let somebody else go first. And so when they let somebody else go first in nano, it didn't work out very well. And there was not that history of success that they could point to and go charge after. In fact, we met a bunch of VCs along the way who said, we don't do materials science company. Sorry, that just isn't our thing. It's too hard. You're an ingredient. You're too far away from the consumer. It's hard science, but litany 6 miles long of all the reasons they weren't going to do a material science company. And so we actually had to drag a few along and convince them that yes, in fact, this was a viable business and that these were the reasons why it was going to be viable and could be successful and should be part of their portfolio. Now that comes back to one of my key things that I like to talk about a lot, which is business is business. It's this, if you can convince someone that it's the right opportunity with the right team and the right technology, they will invest. Now, there are those who won't, no matter what, just because of material science, but if you find someone who will listen to the opportunity, assess the team, and judge the technology, look at the combination of the three together, and you tell the story correctly, you will find an investor.
And Bart, if you could comment, you mentioned it up front that you went very far afield from Seattle to find your investors.
We have, the sensitivities and sensibilities of investors are obviously critical. You need to know what space they're comfortable with. You need to know where in the development cycle they like to come in. You need to know what they expect for an exit strategy, and you need to find out how patient they are. We're talking about an opportunity that will pay off huge, but in about 10 years. And that's really tough to raise money for, particularly in this climate. But we have found those people who are absolutely convinced that the petroleum economy is going to go away. We need a substitute to keep the economies running. We need to make the energy independence argument for not this country entirely, but other countries too. And we've just had to really work the problem and work it hard.
Well, let me ask also in this way, and for the edification of our audience, how does a tiny bootstrap company in Seattle find people in London and Singapore and around the world like that?
We basically hit the pavement and did some. We were very careful not to get out and make a global announcement about what we were doing. We had to secure the space before people figured out that there was even a space there. And so that made it particularly difficult. I mean, what you'd like to do is to do a shotgun public relations release that you put out over the internet, and you get a lot of people behind it. You get magazine articles written. We had to do it in a very stealthy mode, and we were successful in doing it through personal contacts largely. We raised a lot of the money early on through friends and family. A lot of these people were well connected. We worked through a couple of finders, and it just worked out.
It worked out. And Christina, I'm curious your story. Seattle is not known as a major metallurgy center. How's it been for you?
It's actually been really, we haven't had any trouble so far, knock on wood. But I think it goes back to what Chris said, and that is if you have a business that makes sense, if you're tackling a large market need and have a good team and a technology that's protected, it shouldn't be hard. I mean, it's possible to find investors. That said, I think actually Seattle is the perfect place to be starting an advanced materials company. We have one of the largest consumers of advanced materials right here in our backyard. We've got Kenworth on the automotive side, on the trucking side, and we have investors who are very flexible in their definition of what they focus on. So we really do. We have a unique set of properties here in this region that really do make this, I think, a perfect area for this kind of technology to get funded. We just closed a round and we oversubscribed by 2 times just this last round and did not seek any investment outside of the region. So.
Well, congratulations. That's a great story. Chris's earlier comment, which I'd remembered you making about the sort of pullback from material science, leads me to something I'm going to wrap up with, which means in about 3 minutes I'm going to ask for questions, and I hope the audience will have some questions. And that is when several of us first talked, whether we wanted to even emphasize that this program was about nanotechnology, because when I was doing the economic development and we were always citing these LexisNexis citations of nano was going up through 06, and I think starting in 07 the citations went way down, and whether nanotechnology as nano is the correct sort of reference tag to use for any of your businesses, either now or going forward. Whether one wants to maybe have that go away over time. And I'll start with Chris, but I also want the other two to comment on how nano you want to be seen as.
Nano is a 4-letter word. What we actively decided to not use the term nano in our fundraising efforts in the way we described the initial or the early versions of the company. We'll use the term nano when we're talking about our technology and the hard science of what we're doing. So nanocomposites and nanomaterials, and actually talking about the nanometers of width of the pores that we apply for our various ultracapacitor applications. So we will use the term, but I don't ever really talk about us as a nanotechnology company. And I think that's because it doesn't really serve us at all. It doesn't add any value. It doesn't help anybody understand what we're up to. It's kind of like clean tech. Clean tech is huge and means any number of things, and it actually means nothing. What it is that it's an umbrella term for a variety of other things that are going on, including software and some materials and any number of different things that are energy oriented, environmental oriented. It's just this enormous term. I think nano is kind of the same way. It's less relevant than actually describing what your application is. We're an advanced materials company for energy storage. That's what we're doing. That's who we sell to. That's how we win. And that's far more instructive and useful and valuable to us than saying we're a nanotechnology company.
We're building our applications and our products an atom at a time. You can't get much more nano than that. It's absolutely key to what we do. We don't talk about it a lot because we don't want other people to catch on. I'll be very frank.
We do talk about it. We make nano-laminated metals, so to some extent it's, I think, gives you an image of what we actually do. It's also critical element of why our materials work. As we start shrinking laminates of materials down to the nanoscale, there are phenomena that don't occur if the lamina are not of that scale. And so it is important to explaining what we're doing. That said, I don't know what it means to be a nanotechnology company. I mean, the nanotech part of what we do is a tool. It's what makes modumetal possible. But it's not an industry per se, and so I'm challenged to say, oh yes, we're part of that nanotechnology industry, because I don't really know what it is. I just listened to Dr. Hood talk about nanotechnology in the context of what he does, and I don't even understand it. I mean, so either we're not the same thing, or we're part of an industry that we don't understand, but I think it's really, it's fundamentally, and he said it, the tools are what define the boundaries of the technology today, and today nanotechnology defines the boundaries of where we are. It just is a snapshot in time. It's a set of tools that we have available at this snapshot in time.
You were going to, or?
Totally agree.
Okay, one of the comments that I've often made is that if you look at this room and the people who'll be watching this the web, it's saturated with microprocessors, but at this stage in history we don't say this is a micro-enabled conference room or program. It's just the way things are in 2009, and I think 10 or 15 years from now, nano will be effective and pervasive, and you'll talk about beverage preservation or batteries, but if the nanoness calls too much attention to itself, then it hasn't done its job of being well embedded. So it does, to some extent, sort of self-sunset. But it's also, I think, interesting to see the different perspectives across different vertical sectors. So that's the main part I have. Any questions for the audience? Byron?
Sure, thanks, John. Good comments, Mel. Thank you. Two areas of press I'm just curious about. One is competition. How do you look at or deal with competition? When you're doing science kind of at the edge, or is it so hard, so opaque, your strategy is run like hell? So some comments on that, and then also, since you're creating novel materials, how does regulation, environmental and other regulation, factor into what you have to deal with?
I'm just going to quickly repeat that for the recording, which was basically competitive analysis in exotic markets and the impact of regulation, because almost all of these, whether it's energy or transport or whatever, are highly regulated markets.
The Department of Energy has done a very nice job of mapping out all of the various hydrogen storage technologies. On one axis is its weight by weight, or how much hydrogen can you store per weight of material, and the other is how much hydrogen can you store for the volume of material. And on that two-axis plot, they have about 7 different technologies that are outlined. That's our competition, essentially. We had to find out where we fell on that plot. Once we realized that we were significantly above all of the other technologies and could protect ourselves with patents, we knew we had a winner.
Chris or Christina?
So we compete in a market now that's tracked by Lux Research, so we also benefit from some published data in terms of the competitive landscape. That's good news for us because it means it's an industry worth watching. So nanostructured metals in general is considered to be a growing industry. In particular, the use of electrodeposition as a way of producing metals because of its efficiency, its inherent efficiency, is one that's now tracked. The bad news is anytime you see an industry start to be tracked by an analyst, there's a lot more competition and there's a lot more interest. And so it's, I would say we continue to be careful about what we disclose and how we disclose, and that question of what's trade secret and what do we try to patent and how aggressively do we patent. But it's kind of it's the wolf that you hope for, right? So.
Exactly. Yeah, I would. Sounds like one of your questions was, do you even track the competition? And fundamentally, yes, absolutely. It's just good business practice to keep track of your competition. One thing that we found difficult, that's maybe true for other materials-oriented companies, is there's a lot of materials research going on buried within the bowels of larger organizations. And it's really hard to find out what's going on deep down in Kansai Koken Chemical in Japan. Their website's in Japanese. I don't speak Japanese. I don't even know how to go look and read their annual report. So it's actually really, it's really hard to to get down deep into those organizations and find out what's going on. And we found that to be a challenge. We know who our competition is, but what scares me is what don't we know? Because this is exotic science and breakthroughs are possible, what's going to come out of nowhere and I'm going to read in Nature or Science and just suddenly figure out that, oops, we didn't move fast enough. And so far, no signs, but it's one of those things where that's a constant worry.
And we're making exotic organic molecules to store this hydrogen, and we have to be concerned about what happens if there's a car accident, the tank splits open, the material falls on the ground and then starts to decompose through normal biological activity, exposure to ultraviolet radiation. And at some point in time, we're going to have to spend the $50,000 to do that comprehensive toxicity study. We put it through the first screen, which is to find out that these molecules are considered to be relatively benign. They're on the order of gasoline or diesel, but that is a very appropriate question.
It reminds me of one comment earlier at this conference that we're part of tonight called the Nano Health and Safety Forum. One of the speakers was making a comment on that was related to the way Chris described the industry, which is a lot of people say, are nanomaterials toxic? And he said there are no nanomaterials. There are specific materials instantiated at nano. It's not one thing, it's 1,000 things. And so when regulators sort of say we should like ban all nanomaterials, he was saying that doesn't make sense because the difference between yours and yours is so far. So similarly, he was saying nano isn't the right organizing term. But also there's a huge amount of work in toxicity for specific components that's emerging, and that's what this conference was looking at.
Well, one of the markets for us, frankly, is to add hydrogen to diesel fuel so that we cut down the amount of particulate emissions that come out of a diesel tailpipe. That's particularly critical for school buses. There is a substantial amount of carbon that comes out of a diesel exhaust that has particulates that are smaller than 2.5 nanometers across. Mm-hmm. Those particulates are capable of entering the lung and going deep into the lung, and there are some people who are reporting that may be the reason that we're seeing more infant or young people's susceptibility to asthma. Mm. Now that is a nanomaterial, it's a carbon material mm-hmm. of a specific size that mm-hmm. can have very specific consequences.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think you had a question?
I had a question for Christina, and it has to do with the future, and it's a two-part question. If you roll ahead 30 years, mm-hmm. and you're in the same room presenting to the entrepreneurs of the world that have not yet been born yet, the first question is, what really important problem do you hope to be talking about your materials help solve? And the second part of the question is, what worries you today most about the barriers to be able to have that chance to solve that problem, and what are you doing about it?
Wow, that's a great question.
So I'm also going to try to repeat that if I can, which is essentially what are going to be the interesting problems you can solve in 30 years and what will keep you from getting to be able to solve those in 30 years?
So in fact, when I dream of the glorious future, it's not of solving a problem. I mean, I have personal motivations to solve certain problems that the materials industry faces. I have 3 little brothers who are in the Marine Corps. I'm very motivated to see us realize some of our armor objectives, lightweight armor. My co-founder actually rides a little scooter to work every day because he's dumbfounded by the whole concept of moving all of the mass of a vehicle just to move himself from his home to his office. So he's really motivated by the vision of seeing lightweight automobiles on the road. But fundamentally, what I hope to see in 30 years are the tools and the capabilities that allow engineers to approach materials design without the barriers that exist today. So that a young engineer could sit down and say, you know what, I have this problem. Maybe it's the next armor problem that comes along. Maybe it's the next vehicle problem. Maybe it's something I can't even fathom. But we've given them another dial that they can use to actually design the materials of the future. And they're not going to be facing the kind of trade-offs that we have to face today with materials. In terms of the barriers that we see that might make it difficult to get there, because we're going to get there. It's, we're growing a materials company, and I spend a lot of my time, my free time, reading about the history of the steel industry, because I'm fascinated by how some of the technologies, in particular the Bessemer cycle, was the one that made it. And how was it that he developed this technology that came along at the right place, the right time? And look, he built a good business. He protected his intellectual property. He worked closely with his customers on scale up. He understood the economics of what he was trying to accomplish. And I think, fundamentally, and it's not a sexy answer, but those are all of the barriers that we're going to face that we have to be prepared to overcome. So that's what we're working on.
Any other questions? Let me go to the back for a minute, and then we'll do you.
I guess this is a little related to what you were just saying, Christina, but I was wondering if you're going to license your process, but it's still early in the industrial application of it, do you think you'll be able to keep rights to some of the improvements that might be made? It seems like if your customers are the ones that are scaling up the process, they might have some really great improvements.
Are you an attorney?
I'm just going to quickly repeat again. Basically, it's if you're licensing an ingredient at such an early stage, will all the latter stage improvements be outside of your domain potentially?
That's a very good question. We are actually very carefully working with our first customers on how we accomplish scale up. So one of the most, I think, compelling things about how we're approaching the market is we actually go in with systems that get implemented on top of an electroplating facility. So in order to manufacture the types of structures we manufacture, there's actually a piece of infrastructure that goes in place. And our very first partner that we're working on with Scale Up, I am quite certain is going to come up with some improvements on that set of systems. And so, again, not so sexy answer, it's all in our contractual relationships with our customers, and fundamentally, our partners want to implement this technology. I mean, we are in an industry where the margins are like nothing. There is not much that's sexy going on in the electroplating industry. So there's a desire and a motivation to realize a technology like this, and quite frankly, we just have to get the contractual relationships in place that make it possible for us to capture those capabilities that are going to evolve over time.
A similar answer from me.
All right, and you had a question?
Yeah, I was curious. We talked about a lot of the different aspects of your different businesses. It's all very fascinating, the way you're managing your strategies, et cetera. I'm curious, as we move to these types of businesses where it's that extreme science, it seems to me those scientists, those PhDs are part and parcel to the business. How do you manage that as a resource and as not just attracting the right people and building the right team, but maintaining that innovative culture and moving forward?
Which I'll repeat that question is basically the care and feeding of PhDs, as opposed to maybe high school programmers.
I'll start. So we're almost all scientists today. So there's 2 business people and a bunch of scientists, and there's two ways we think about it. One is it's an organization just like any other, and there's organizational dynamics, and you have to set up the right organizational structure, and you have to manage people effectively and give them goals, and good managers manage their people according to what those people need. So there's not one size fits all, and you have to apply that to each PhD. And as Christine said earlier, PhDs are not this agglomeration of identical clones that all get managed the same way. They're people with different desires, different needs, different motivations. They all have to be managed as individuals. That's just normal people management stuff. I don't see any difference in how you set up an organization to be successful and have communication work right and have people be motivated the right way and have the goals all clear. On the flip side, though, we're trying hard to set up the R&D function, the science function, to be effective at what we need. And it's a couple of things. It goes back to what I talked about earlier, is we're trying to set up the sense that it's okay to be 80% right in the schedule. Just tell us what you think is going to be pretty much right. There is a scientific tendency to not give an answer until you know 99.99% sure that it's right. Can't do that because then the date is so far out that it becomes irrelevant, meaningless. So we're trying to encourage that sense of take a risk. Tell us what is likely to occur, not definitely going to occur, but likely to occur, and then we can manage around that and mitigate for risk and failure and all those kinds of good things. So it's that sense of it's okay to stretch and be loose. The other thing is that we're trying to set up an organization that can take advantage of serendipity, and so that we're not so focused on these are the goals we have to hit, and I told somebody that we were going to hit this date, so I'm tunnel vision on that and that alone. There's a lot of good stuff that happens in the scientific world that is a result of an accident, that is an experiment gone awry, that is something you didn't expect, and if you miss that, you might miss the next big thing. And so we're trying to make sure that people are picking their heads up and looking around and making sure that there's time to kind of think about how do we not miss the next big thing while still hitting our deadlines.
We are trying to raise enough money so that we can run a lot of our projects in parallel. That's supposed to have a backup plan and also to try to accelerate the timetable. We're going to be doing it with in-house people. We're going to be doing it with university people. We're going to be doing it with cooperative arrangements with current commercial corporations. So we're just trying to come up with a number of different ways to skin the cat.
Christina, any thoughts?
Yeah, so you brought up a good question about these scientists, and that's probably the greatest challenge, is growing a company and growing the scientists at the same time. And we have scientists on our team that don't want to grow outside of the lab, and we have scientists on our team that have great potential and want to learn more about the business side and what's going to happen when they start realizing this technology in the field. And quite frankly, the greatest challenge for me, I'm a physicist, by the way, so I know exactly what it's like. It's trying to find the resources and help the team grow as we grow, because a lot of those inventions, a lot of those the innovations that are going to come as we scale up may very well come from our team that's seen it from the get-go. I have 2 PhDs on my team who both have been through the patent bar. They both willingly said they wanted to do it. I have probably 5 engineers now that have been through the Leadership Training for Managers program at the Dale Carnegie course. We send people off to Harvard Business School for a week to go take classes if they want to. And we're very, very open to that because ultimately we're going to reap the rewards of that. And I think part of that is building the team. The other part is we actually don't ever raise enough money. We always just raise just enough money. And I found that some of the greatest innovations actually come from the team being overtaxed and having to create innovation. So, a great example is transitioning into the field, trying to get technology that's going to work with our customer base. We don't have the coolest gadgets, and neither do they. And so we've got to figure out basically bootstrap ways of making the technology work. And that, believe it or not, has done more to cultivate our innovative and really research and development environment than anything else.
Does your team know your sneaky strategy?
Oh yeah, actually, if you come through our lab, we have equipment, almost all of our equipment is purchased on eBay, and it's in various forms of, basically dysfunction when it comes in the front door, and we make it work. And if you come for a tour, you'll meet Leslie, who can build like mechanical equipment from nothing, from pieces of RC cars. And we bought our very first piece of brand new equipment just a month ago, and you'd be amazed at how many like new gadgets it's got attached to it now. So yeah, it's great.
All right, I think that's, I'm sorry. Sure, one more.
All 3 companies have a common theme of potential automobile industry applications. I'm wondering what their speculation might be about our 2 bankruptcies making it easier for entrepreneurial companies to work with the automobile industry to bring new innovation to the mass market.
So the question is, since all of these in some respect relate to transportation automobiles, he was asking what would be the effect of the current bankruptcies and the turmoil in the auto industry basically making it easier, which I suppose maybe in your cases, is it easier to sell to Tesla than GM?
Well, thankfully, we don't have to sell directly to automotive companies. We sell to device manufacturers who have to sell to the automotive companies. I think that a potential benefit for the industry as a whole, though, those who sell stuff to the automotive companies, may be that they become a little less bureaucratic, a little more nimble. They're awful to sell to. Awful, awful, awful. Having done it in a previous life, there are people who just take sadistic pleasure in making vendors squirm. And it's unpleasant, it's unpredictable, it sucks all the margin out of your opportunity, and just not much innovation occurs. Maybe, just maybe, the new and improved GM and Chrysler will realize that that isn't the ticket to long-term success. That maybe there's better vendor management models that actually encourage long-term partnership and don't turn into just give me this part at the absolute possible lowest cost.
We've spent a considerable amount of time looking at the landscape with automobile companies, and we've identified 4 who have a very specific desire to be in the hydrogen business and have been looking for us, in essence, and we're going to go after them aggressively here this summer. And people that are on the short list are not GM and Chrysler.
So we actually have 2 partners in the automotive industry. We have a contract with one of them. So we have been touched by the downturn, and you know, all of these companies are in trouble. Neither of our partners are bankrupt at this point, but I would say the outlook is not good for the automotive industry. They've communicated that to us. That said, the stimulus funding has been an incredible godsend for all of them and for us as well, by sort of association. So a lot of our focus within the automotive industry right now has been on partnerships for example, the Freedom Car Initiative and the 21st Century Truck Initiative, and to see if we can leverage the funding that's going into the economy to see some of these technologies get developed, so that, you know, when the upturn starts, we're ready.
Okay, I will call the end. I appreciate your time. I think this has been very interesting, and primarily I think hopefully it will demonstrate to the audience and to the viewers that there are some very exciting, to make Chris's point, some very exciting opportunities beyond iPhone apps. I think there are some tremendously interesting opportunities for small bootstrapped companies in extreme science and I won't say nanotechnology, but advanced materials. And I hope you look more into that, into these companies. Thank you all very much for coming.